In today's new episode, we speak with Emmy-winning filmmaker Nancy Schwartzman about her new documentary on the mysterious death of Ellen Greenberg. The documentary is from ABC News Studios, and it's called Death in Apartment 603, What Happened to Ellen Greenberg. Nancy directed, was showrunner and executive producer, and the documentary is available to stream now on Hulu as of today, Monday, September 29th. If you're passionate about this case, and we know a lot of folks are, Nancy invites you to get involved on social media to push for change in this case. Okay, so we hope you enjoy this interview, and you can check out Nancy's work at MsNancySchwartzman.com. There are links in the show notes for that and to the documentary. Thanks a lot for listening. Welcome to the podcast, Nancy Schwartzman. Nancy, how are you today?
I am very well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. You come to this conversation with this incredible story that you've told in such a professional and respectful manner. But before we get into all of that, and also well done on it, it's really, really good. Before we get into all of that, do you mind introducing yourself and maybe a little bit of background and why you're on the program today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's awesome to be here, and I'm excited for our conversation. I am Nancy Schwartzman. I'm a doc filmmaker. I do features and series. Really, I like to focus on investigation and sort of like victim-centered storytelling. And unfortunately, that's because a lot of crime lands on female victims, right? And so I've gotten very experienced in telling those stories and like honoring who they are and like the kind of nuances that go with violence when it's directed against women. I also love investigation, and I love talking to people who want to know more, who have a lot of experience and can smell when something doesn't seem right. And a lot of my projects have looked at sort of maybe initially human error and bad police work that sort of snowballs into something different and bigger. So, yeah. So I'm super excited to be here talking about Death in Apartment 603, What Happened to Ellen Greenberg, my newest series.
Yeah, this is a great docuseries, really interesting, compelling story. Before we get into the story of the documentary, can we just hear a little bit from you about how you heard this story and what got you interested in it enough to make a documentary?
Yeah. Well, incidentally, I'm from Philly. So I'm from Philadelphia. And when I first started hearing about Ellen's story, it was like, oh my gosh, this is a young woman and she was engaged to be married. And I remember that time in my life, and she lived in Manayunk, this like super hip area where I used to play tennis, and her fiancé went to the high school that I went to. And all of a sudden it really just felt like everything was in my backyard, and that I knew this domain really well. Like my prior project was all in Canada, right? It's in Vancouver and in BC and all these, really cool exotic places that I'm not from. And so this story in Philadelphia, I was like, holy shit, like I know this place really well. And I felt like I knew Ellen, and I felt like I knew her family. So I felt really compelled. I found it very relatable.
So before we do get into this, I just want to compliment you on the documentary that you made, Roll Red Roll.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable. Just wanted to get that out of the way. If anyone has not seen that documentary, you really need to go and check that out. So just wanted to fanboy you for a second.
Thank you. Well, that one hits different because that was my first film, and like that was, I am so delighted that I do a lot of, network projects, but that was like just total indie, like hand built, every frame. beginner's mind, like all that stuff. So I really appreciate it. And it was it's so funny. It's like the more things change, the more they don't, right? That one.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me, not to go down, I know I don't want to go on a tangent, but we were just talking with somebody who was covering the story of a few missing young women from the Pacific Northwest. A couple of them were actually murdered by a serial killer, and one of them went to the police and wasn't believed. And we kind of said in an ironic way, well, that was the 70s. It's so different nowadays, and it's not.
No. No, it's not. Yeah. Yeah. So, well, thank you for saying that about Roll Red Roll, because that one's my baby. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about this story and who was Ellen Greenberg?
Ellen Greenberg was 27 years old when she was found dead, but to know her alive is to know someone that really touched everyone around her. And I'm not even saying this in a cliched manner. From the concierge at the building was like, that girl always had a smile on her face and she would offer to make me food. And she was just like a sweetheart to her students. She was a first grade teacher. And that was a career she sort of found. She went in a few directions and ended up teaching and just took to it like a fish in water. She was also like a little fashion girl before there were influencers. She knew the trends. She knew the right lip gloss color and how to put your hair in the messy French bun. Like, she just was the girl that always knew how to put herself together, but also always had time for everybody. She went to Penn State. She was from Harrisburg. She was an only child, which is important. She and her mom were like best friends, but she was also a daddy's girl. Like, she played sports and she would go to games with her dad, and they just really loved her and they had a good relationship. And something that stood out to me also about Ellen when I met her extended family, they're so tight knit. It's such an amazing family that all came together after Ellen died. Yeah, so she's just like a generous, good person who also is very normal. She liked Beyonce. She liked to like drink and party, and she died at the beginning of what was supposed to be the next chapter of her life. She had sent out the save the date cards. She was getting married. She was living with her boyfriend for the first time, who was then her fiancé. So she was ready to, hopefully have kids and be a mom. And her friends had noticed that she had gotten a little bit anxious over time. And her parents had noticed, like, Ellen said she wanted to come home and we don't know why, right? We don't want her to lose her job, but something's going on. It doesn't seem like it's about work, even though she says it's about work. So something was changing in her. She was losing weight. She was anxious. She was really unhappy. But what kind of breaks my heart is that she didn't feel like she could talk about what was happening. And I think if we remember 2011, which is when this happened, it's not that long ago, but things were really different. Like, people didn't talk about therapy. They didn't talk about healthy relationships in the same way that they might now. So what pains me is that I think Ellen felt like she had to weather these things by herself. And if she was in a harmful situation, she couldn't really tell anyone. I think she put a lot of pressure on herself to be perfect. And I think a lot of women, and young women especially, can relate to that. So, that's who Ellen was when she was alive. She touched a lot of people. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she's found dead by her fiance in what was declared a suicide.
I would love to hear your thoughts on how you approach filmmaking when you're talking about somebody who's going through a domestic abuse situation and dealing with the fact that she's probably unfairly shaming herself and embarrassed about it, and coming from a pretty close-knit family, not wanting to make it look like she's letting them down in a way. So how do you start telling that story? Like, where do you even begin?
Yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily definitively know what was going on in her relationship, but we do know that there was bruising, and we do know that she was unhappy. It's so upsetting. I think a really like poignant moment is in the doc when Sandy, the mom, says, "We had no idea. And why would she think she has to hide that from us?" And I think it's like so important that we all understand that you don't have to weather that alone, but it's also so understandable. It's so embarrassing and shameful when your relationship, especially when it looks great to the outside world. Look, we're like swimming in Instagram and everyone's kind of bullshit projection of how awesome their life is, right? So that to have to be really bracingly honest about it, like this isn't the person I thought, this isn't the marriage I want. Actually, this isn't working. And I don't know why, and I feel like it's my fault, is such a hard thing to break through. And we don't know, like Ellen was making a fruit salad right before she was found dead, right? Ellen had her boots on, her outside shoes inside. And I know Ellen, I mean, I know the kind of girl she was. She did not wear her snowy, gross outside city boots inside her house, right? So we don't know what was going on, but it does appear like maybe she was getting ready to go. So yeah, I mean, I think her parents, once they understood there was bruising involved, had to sit with how hard that is. And I can't imagine if you love someone and you feel close to them to find out that they're hiding something from you is really sad and hard, Yeah.
Now, can you tell us about the journey of this determination of what happened to her? Because it seemed like it was headed towards a homicide determination initially, and then it was ruled suicide, and it's kind of gone back and forth a little bit. Can you tell us how that is?
Yeah, I mean, so when the cops first got called to the scene where Ellen and Sam, her fiance, lived at the time, is like a super low crime area. It's called Manayunk. It's also really hilly. And I mentioned that because it was a terrible snowstorm. And this is like, it's almost like San Francisco style, like hills. And so to get there with EMT and like, it's just like, oh God, it's like snowing like crazy. We just got a call. Oh man, we have to go out. So the people who went out are not like seasoned homicide detectives who are like, really used to this kind of thing because it's a super low crime area. So they walk in, they see a body, they see it slumped over. And look, Sam Goldberg, the fiance, is being incredibly cooperative. He's telling them what he thinks happened. She killed herself. He's saying, I was locked out. I was locked out. I was locked out. They talk to a neighbor who says, yeah, I saw that the door had been locked, So they initially say it's a suicide. So the cops on the scene take this guy's word. Okay, he's a nice guy. He's a white guy. It's a nice neighborhood. He seems really upset. Okay. Now here's where things start to sort of fall apart. So it's deemed a suicide then and there, and then they don't hold the scene. Now some experts would say you walk in, yeah, this guy's cooperating. Yeah, he's crying, but this is real weird looking. This is a bunch of stab wounds. It's bloody. Let's be safe and just like preserve it and hold it as a homicide. So number one, they don't hold the scene. Number two, they don't really document the body in scene. So the other thing that we learn later is that she also had 10 stab wounds on her back and on the back of her head. So that's not even clocked on scene, which is sort of like you would think law enforcement would poke around a little bit more. Also, is there stuff they should look at in the bathroom? Is there maybe some deeper questioning they should do to the person who found the body and made the 911 call? Yes, none of that happened. So the scene is not treated professionally at all. Then the body goes to the medical examiner's office, which is sort of this interesting, like not quite neutral, but supposed to be neutral body. Like they receive the body. They have to get some information from law enforcement. In a perfect world, these two agencies work together and it's never shady. Law enforcement needs to say whether or not there were windows broken. There weren't. So it's like, okay, it wasn't a break and enter. No one's roaming the halls of the Venice lofts. So it probably wasn't a stranger from outside. There's no one on camera that's unrecognizable that came in. So as far as we know. So the medical examiner gets the body, has some of that information, and then just looks at the body straight up. And then he's like, there are 20 stab wounds on this body. There is, significant bruising on this body. Not all of it is new. I'm going to mark this a homicide. That's just like basic stuff, right? So then there's kind of a miscommunication because the next morning, the building manager says the fiance's family wants to come into the apartment and get some affects for the funeral. So Ellen is Jewish, and Jewish funerals happen really quickly, which actually, unfortunately, can hinder investigation. Like they're 48 hours. So the building manager does her due diligence and says the family wants to come in. He needs to get a suit. They're going to have the funeral in a day. She calls her management company and says it's super bloody in here. Like, I don't know if the family should traipse around. And they say, call the cops. She calls law enforcement and they say, well, it's no longer a crime scene. You can go ahead and get it cleaned up. So she calls, gets it cleaned. And then the uncle and another member of the family, of the fiance's family, go in, get a suit, get some shoes, and also take all of the technology out of the apartment. They take Ellen's computers and her phone. So this is like crazy red flag stuff in terms of like, holy crap, especially in this day and age, we know everything can be solved on your phone. Like there's just so much evidence on your phone and computer that like that stuff is so important. It should have been taken right away and put into law enforcement's custody. So that stuff gets removed. And in fairness, once law enforcement said, okay, this is a homicide, give it back, the uncle absolutely did, but it was already 2+ days out of custody. So once the medical examiner, so here's the miscommunication is that building called cops didn't get the memo from the medical examiner that like, oh, no, this is now a homicide. So like, okay, it's a suicide, go in, clean. And then it's like, oh shit, it's a homicide. Then they go rush back and hold the scene when it's probably cleaner than it's ever been because it was cleaned up by professional crime scene cleanup. I mean, that's a disaster. That's like Keystone Cops miscommunication. We all could imagine how that would happen, right? Like someone says this, oh crap, this message didn't get passed over. So there's a way that that's still like a bunch of human error. But at that point, it's a mess. So the family's super confused. They go to the funeral and they think it's a suicide. Two important things happen there. In Jewish ritual, members of the community sort of wash the body and shroud it and stay with it. So this always makes me so emotional, but like, so that she's not alone, while you're waiting. Sorry. These are not forensic medical examiners. These are like old ladies, who do this as a religious ritual. They hear, okay, my gosh, Ellen Greenberg, we remember her. It's in Harrisburg. She left us for Philly, but my God, she committed suicide. It's so sad. This is what they're thinking. And then they watch and see the body and they're like, what the f? There's 20 stab wounds on this girl. So they know something that the parents don't know at this point. And they also are seeing this body up close. That information starts to whisper out a little bit in the community. Like, we saw something. We saw her body. This is not normal. And then Josh and Sandy find out at the funeral that suddenly it's not a suicide, it's a homicide. So then it becomes like The Godfather. You're like, oh my God, you're like at a family event. And the funeral, they said, was like split in half, just kind of naturally. Maybe that happens naturally. But anyway, so all's to say, it's like super dramatically revealed at the funeral that all of a sudden this is a homicide. So it's just a really crazy chain of events, how it all unfolded there.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program. And you did mention that the uncle, so it was Samuel's uncle who went into the apartment. Can you elaborate a little more on this man and who he is and where he comes from and what he does for a job?
Yeah, I'm sure he's retired now or close to retiring, but he and I share a last name, but we are not related at all. But James Schwartzman was a very prominent attorney in Philadelphia. And he also then later became a judge. So he's pretty well known in the legal community there. So upstanding. He's on the board. I think it's a Villanova, or he's a chair in the Department of Ethics and Law. So he's kind of a big figure in the community. And, you would think now maybe the devices were taken so we could get pictures for the event, but, it bothers me that they were taken out by someone who's not family. And they weren't given to the family either, right? So Sam and Ellen aren't married yet. So it's not like official that they're like legally family, right? So yeah, so James Schwartzman is a lawyer who knows his way around the law and probably knows his way around, how to behave in a situation like that. So it is strange to take the tech out of there.
And can you tell us a little bit about the 911 call?
Yeah, so that call, it really was a lot of work to get the call. The Greenbergs had to find a private investigator who's former law enforcement. So Thomas Brennan spent 20 plus years on the force and then became a PI. So he knows Pennsylvania and Philly really well. He was developing sources and getting people to talk. And then they found someone who had worked or was still working at the DA's office who was able to get his hands on Ellen's file. And the file was buried because a few months after it was declared homicide, it was sort of without a lot of transparency re-declared a suicide. So then the case is closed. So it's not an active case. The file isn't under like homicides Philly or homicides Manayunk. It's just sort of like, where is this file? He had heard about it. He dug around. He found it under a box of Christmas decorations. And then he laid out the file and he was like, whoa, this is crazy. So in the 911 call, you hear like a bunch of different things. You hear some really legitimate distress at the beginning, some panic. Then you hear Sam, who discovers the body and makes the call, discover that Ellen has stabbed herself. And he says in the call, she fell on a knife. And oh my gosh, she stabbed herself. She fell on a knife. She's slunched over, she's kind of slouched, and the knife is sticking out of her chest. So I don't know how you fall on that knife. That would be really hard to do in that way. And it takes him a couple minutes to see the knife. Now, if you're in a state of panic, we went into the apartment and we measured the distance and it's about 10 feet. Maybe you see it, maybe you don't. And sometimes there were certain photos of it because I really studied the autopsy report and all the photographs. There's certain photos and angles where you might not see, you don't see the blade, right? And it's chaotic and bloody. So there is a way that we're not sure, like if you're in a trauma state, you might miss it. But I know that jumps out to people that it took a very long time to notice. And then the 911 dispatcher is coaching him on giving CPR. And he sounds reluctant about it. He says, I guess I have to, right? And that upsets a lot of people, I think, because a lot of people would say, whoa, 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 whoa. The first thing I'd be on the ground covered in blood of my loved one trying to wake them up. And just to be like really clear, trauma affects everybody differently. You don't know if people can see, if they're not speaking well, or they get really polite, or they're, whatever. They're all different. But what I did respect was that a lot of people who listened to this call were people who had worked in law enforcement and listened to thousands of calls, and one of our experts, Guy DeAndrea, is like, I've listened to thousands of calls and this is one of the most unusual ones I've ever heard. So it's out there. It's definitely in the series and you can sort of listen to it yourself and draw your own conclusions. But I think there's a lot to unpack from it. And
where were the stab wounds on her body?
That's a great question. So there are 10 in the front, and it is assumed that the one in the knife is the final one, because that would have been the fatal blow. But there's also 10 stab wounds in her back. And there's an incredibly big blunt force trauma and a big one in the back of the head. And normally, just to be clear, in my work, I wouldn't have put graphic crime scene photos into the show. If this were cut and dry homicide, you'd be like, okay, here's a bit so you understand this was a very bloody overkill situation, because anyone would define 20 stab wounds as overkill, right? But I felt like it was important for people to see what the wounding looked like so that they could draw their own conclusions as to whether or not this could be suicide. Because we talk about hesitation wounds, because there are stabbing suicides. They're not usually done by women, and they're not usually done by women who hate pain and blood, like Ellen. That was something all her friends were like, she hated that. She barely had her ears pierced. So you can have a few defensive wounds, but 20 and 10 in the back is so insane and improbable that would be declared a suicide. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really shocking about the stab wounds to her head.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't even know like what sort of force it would take to put a knife through a skull.
Yeah. Like a significant amount. And I think it's also important that we had 2 outside medical examiners look at the file, and they also found, in addition to the stab wounds and in addition to 11 bruises on her body, bruising to her neck and strap muscles. That shows evidence of choking. So that's like to me, feels like a significant piece of evidence and part of the bigger picture here.
Yeah. Also weird to me in the 911 call, how he says she stabbed herself. She fell on a knife, but apparently hadn't noticed the knife at that point. I don't know. Wait, was there only one knife that was used, or was there a second knife used?
I believe there may have been evidence that there was a smooth blade and a serrated blade. Mm-hmm.
And she hadn't been wearing her engagement ring. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm.
So did it seem like, from her friend's perspective, that the relationship could have been coming to an end, or at least going through some troubles?
Well, Ellen kind of withdrew a bit from her friends and would sort of pivot away from topic about the wedding, for example. Like, her best friend was really like kept out of any of the planning in a way. And some of her teacher colleagues would be like, you're super stressed about work. Let's talk about your wedding. What are flowers and, blah, blah, blah. And she just like didn't want to talk about it. So I think it was just a bit more of avoidance, because she wasn't really transparent about what was going on. Everything had to sort of appear perfect. So I think that was the kind of pressure on herself. And she didn't wear the ring. Many of the teachers at the school did wear their rings. Some said, hey, I don't want to like show off my ring at school. But both of her colleagues that she was tight with remarked on the fact that she didn't wear it. Yeah.
I'm sorry if I missed that. How long had it been since she wasn't wearing it, from when she was initially engaged?
I don't have that exact number, but it was definitely like, she had just sent the save the dates out. So they were a couple months away from getting married, and she wasn't wearing it.
Can we talk about the lock of the apartment door a little bit? This seems to be, I guess, a clue that has potentially held up this case or kept it where it should be. I don't know, but can you tell us a little bit about how that lock was found?
Yeah, so there's this idea of like a locked door mystery, right? So if there's a kind of door latch that's common in hotels, and this kind of like newer construction building, Ellen was found. Sam had to shoulder his way into the apartment to get in. So Ellen was dead and Sam was locked out. And there are 2 witnesses from the hallway who said they passed by, one passed by, and Sam was showing him, look, I'm locked out. Hey, I'm locked out. So initially Sam was locked out. He went to the gym and he couldn't get back in his building. He went down to the lobby. He told the concierge, I'm locked out, I'm locked out. So they have fobs, like you get in with a fob, but if the latch is done, how are we going to get in? I'm sure there's some tool that the maintenance guy has, or you have to like bust in with your shoulder and get your fingers in and open it, or however you get in. So Sam made it really clear that he was locked out multiple times, and there's an eyewitness that saw the latch was engaged. There was the mistaken idea that Sam brought the concierge upstairs with him, and he had an eyewitness to breaking down the door and discovering Ellen for the first time. But that's not accurate. That did not happen. So Sam is the only one who opened the door and found Ellen. No one saw him do that. So there was a lot of discussion about how he couldn't have done anything to Ellen because the door was locked, or we know there were no broken windows, so there's no intruder from the outside. So if the door is truly locked and Ellen's alone in there, then it had to have been suicide. So the flip side to this is the building manager of the Venice Lofts, who knows the building very well and goes in and out of units, has said, I've exited, slammed the door, and accidentally engaged the latch and locked myself out. So that means that two people could have been in that apartment. One of them could have walked out and locked himself out, right? Or locked themselves out. So this airtight thing that I was locked out just isn't airtight when you can go on YouTube and show various ways of getting in with like dental floss or a card and all that, which God knows if that happened. And tons of people who've said, oh my gosh, I've slammed those doors and gotten locked out. So the lock engages with force. You don't have to have someone engage that for you. So that's a pretty, you can poke a lot of holes in that as your reason. You know, what do you all think of the latch? Because the latch is like all over Reddit, and I didn't really engage with Reddit because we have an eyewitness. No one says Sam's jimmying the like that's not happening. That's unlikely. That's how do you even figure out how to do that unless you're MacGyver? You know what I mean? So I just think for me, what was very clear was that a woman who knows that building well and is in and out of the units has locked herself out.
Yeah, that was very interesting to hear. And she was speaking about that specific unit or just the units in
The
general?
building.
Or?
Yeah,
Right.
those doors, like the weight, it's not the most like heavy wood, you know, like how heavy is the wood? How, you know, it's like it's the same building. So the materials are the same.
The fact that the point about the doorman or the concierge having been up there and being the eyewitness, and then that kind of being hidden, that wasn't actually true, is huge to me and very suspicious, I would say.
Yeah, and we don't know, like we do know that the police report says it, but as someone who like has looked at a lot of police reports, like that may just be their mistake. You know, we don't know if Sam misrepresented it or they wrote, oh, da 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 da. You know what I mean? But the bottom line is that's what the report says. So that's what everyone went with. And that's absolutely, thank God for surveillance camera. That's just not what happened. So there are just these certain details that were supposed to make things ironclad that you're like, I feel like the wounding on her body is much more significant to investigate than whether a door that locks itself sometimes was engaged or not.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, the text messages that Sam sent to Ellen, I thought that was a very interesting part. Can you describe those a little bit?
Yeah. So throughout the course of about an hour and a half, Sam is locked out, or about an hour, excuse me. And he starts to send messages like, hello, like open the door, or what's going on? He made a couple calls. He called Sandy and was like, do you know what's going on with Ellen? Is she like have her headphones on? Is she in the shower? Like he told the police he thought these things. But I think what's interesting, and it's in his own words, is like it's getting like increasingly more and more angry, right? And if you're concerned about someone, like, oh, are you okay? Did you fall? What's going on? Had they had an argument? He didn't say. So it's like, I know you're mad at me, but come on, open up, right? Like, so it's just they get increasingly more kind of aggressive, like, hello, I'm really getting mad. What's going on? You better have an excuse. You have no idea. So I feel like if I were locked out and worried about someone, that's not what I would be texting. I get it. I get like being locked out is frustrating. So I can understand at the beginning if you guys are like in a scrap or something. But yeah, so there's a series of those messages and they're irate, and they get kind of like increasingly angry.
Yeah, that was really striking because if you are still operating off of the mindset that this was a suicide, and one would assume that signs of her being suicidal would have been present in their relationship, and then you come back to a locked door.
Right.
I mean, you would want to say, is everything okay? Tell me you're all right. Like, tell me you're all right. Something like that. I need to know. I'd be calling. Because if she killed herself in that manner, that would suggest that she had been feeling really, really, really depressed. I mean, it's not like an overdose of sleeping pills where you drift away. I mean, this is a violent way to kill yourself. Almost 99.9% impossible. There would have been sounds. There would have been, something. But yeah, the reaction there is just mind-boggling to me, given the fact that, again, if you're operating off of the suicide thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Are you okay? Are you okay? I'm worried. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's also odd that if he's staging the scene, why would he send texts that get aggressive and seem to imply that, there might be a domestic violence situation in their relationship? That part is strange to me too.
Yeah. For anyone listening, Nancy is just smiling and nodding.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Now, there was quite a legal battle that the Greenberg family has undergone here, and very admirably, I would add. Can you talk about that a little bit and what this battle has taken out of them?
Yeah. I mean, the Greenbergs knew in their heart that their daughter did not kill herself. They felt that deeply in their heart. And to be clear, what we just talked about with, if you're truly concerned about suicide, her therapist, Ellen had only seen a therapist 3 times, right? So that's really not a deep relationship that you're forming with a complete stranger. However, the therapist said she has no suicidal ideation. She's anxious. She said she's anxious, but she's exhibiting no signs, has not discussed it. None of her friends, all of her friends said she wasn't herself. She definitely seemed agitated, but none of them were like, oh my God, I'm like deeply worried. I think she's having ideation. So it feels like it's out of left field, right? And in addition, Sam, in his police statement, says that she had never stated that she wanted to harm herself. So it's just like nowhere to be found was there suicidal ideation. So let's just be very clear about that. Doesn't mean there wasn't other stuff going on, but like that wasn't part of it, it seems. So the family, is obviously stunned. They're just stunned. The whole thing goes down in 2.5 months. It goes from losing their beloved only daughter to, my God, having to grapple with the thought that maybe it was a suicide, which didn't make sense, and then a homicide. And then suddenly you have this like institutional clampdown, case closed, suicide. So they're like in shock and in a state of grief. And like Sandy describes it as just like everything was black. And I believe that probably went on for a year at least. And even just finding the will to get up in the morning. So their journey has been so painstaking. It went from finding the private investigator, getting her hand, they got her file, but they didn't want to look at it. Of course, they didn't want to see the photos, right? So they gave it to Tom Brennan, trusted him to go through, and he said, this looks like a homicide. So first thing he saw was that the blood, she's sitting up, and the blood on her face is moving in the other direction. Gravity has pulled it down as if she had been lying flat to start. So it appeared as if the body had been moved, according to his analysis as law enforcement. So that's one thing that didn't sit right. Then over time, they get their hands on the file, they get their hands on the 911 call, they hear the call, it's like, holy shit. And then eventually they're moving. Everything is inching towards what can we do? Like, how can we find recourse, right? So they are ignored by the city. I know that the case had been dropped. No one will take their calls. Eventually they get to the press. And this is where the Philadelphia Inquirer really had like an incredible role in putting this stuff forward. It gave them enough juice to then get an attorney, to then get surveillance footage, to then get motions in order saying, we want the manner of death changed and we want a reexamination. So that was years and years compressed into like a 3-part series, but it really was like these people piecing things together, bringing it to an incredibly rigorous journalist. And she took a year on the piece, took a year, tried to get answers from cops, tried to get answers from the Attorney General's office, all this stuff, where eventually enough things were brought together that they could start the legal journey, which started in 2021 with depositions and a couple really insane discoveries, such as some of the wounds might have been inflicted after Ellen was already dead. That was in a deposition. Yeah. So possibly, right? We can't say definitively, but that was said under oath. So holy crap, there's like a lot here. And once you get the judge involved, people share more information. So now we're like, I came on board and my first day of filming was the lawsuit against the city. So it was like February 3rd, get to City Hall, roll the cameras in, let's go. It was totally wild. And then it's like, you can't film, you can't film, you can't film. We settled, it's like, holy shit, what a day one of filming. It's like insane. And right before we started filming, a few days prior, the medical examiner, Dr. Osborne, retracted his suicide ruling. So that really gave ammunition for a settlement. And now we're waiting to see. So the city is now being mandated to do a reexamination, to look at everything and look at everything again. And we will hopefully have an answer October 14th.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's an incredible timing to jump on board when look, sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes it takes this kind of momentum and the press and pressure from the true crime community who's been all over Ellen's case, really raising a lot of really important questions. And it's like the momentum just starts and then it's like, okay, it's happening. Hey, we're filming. This is your chance to talk, and the more stuff that comes out, the more people are willing or unwilling to talk. So, yeah.
And what is Samuel up to today? He's been a cooperative part of this process, I imagine?
No. We reached out to Sam a few times, and he and his family have responded no, that they wouldn't participate in interview. But he's working, and he has a family, and he moved on. Mm-hmm.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for joining us here today and discussing this new documentary. It's really well done, and we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I hope everyone watches it Monday, September 29th on Hulu, and get vocal and get active because, maybe we're going to get to see some justice here. Well, I'm really glad I got to hang with you guys and that you care so much about Ellen's story.